Welcome to this React Data Grid component tutorial. In this video, I will show you how to handle CRUD operations on the server side using the Data Manager with the URL adapter in the Syncfusion React Data Grid. Handling server-side CRUD operations becomes simple and efficient when using the Syncfusion Data Manager. First, I create a new ASP.NET Core web application with React as the front end. I have already installed the Grid component package on the client side. I have already added basic functionality, such as paging and sorting to display data from the server-side data source. If you want to learn how to get started with the React Data Grid, check out the video linked in the card and description. Next, I add the code to render the data on both the client side and the server side. Using the Data Manager, you can create, update, and delete records from either a local data source or a remote data source. Now, I will configure the data source in the server-side application. I open the application and create a folder named Models and a class called Orders Details. Inside this class, I define a static list that acts as an in-memory data source. This list stores the order records used for CRUD operations. I add a default constructor, which is required for object initialization. I define a parameterized constructor. This constructor is used to create new order records by assigning these values to their corresponding properties, such as order ID, customer name, freight, and so on. Then, I define a method called getAllRecords. This method is responsible for returning the complete list of order records. Inside this method, I first check whether the order list is empty. If the list is empty, I populate it with sample data using a loop. This ensures that the grid has enough data to demonstrate paging, sorting, and CRUD operations. Once the data is generated, the method returns the order list. I define the properties of the Orders Details class. These properties represent individual columns in the React Data Grid. Next, I will configure the API controller. I add an API controller named Grid Controller inside the Controllers folder. This controller handles communication between the React Data Grid and the server. Now, I need to install packages like Syncfusion EJ2 ASP.NET Core and Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC Newton Soft JSON package. So, I open the NuGet Package Manager. First, I install the Syncfusion EJ2 ASP.NET Core in the application. This package provides ASP.NET Core server-side support for Syncfusion EJ2 JavaScript components. Next, I install the Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC Newton Soft JSON package with the required version. This package enables JSON serialization and deserialization in ASP.NET Core. I import the necessary namespaces using directives in the Grid controller file like Models and Syncfusion libraries. At the top, I configure routing using the API controller and route attributes. This endpoint will be used by the Data Manager. Here I inherit from controller base because this controller is used for API operations. Inside the controller, I define an HTTP POST method. Here, I process the request from the Data Manager, calculate the total record count, and return the response in the required format by sending both the result and the total record count. Next, I define a helper method called getOrderData. This method is responsible for retrieving the order records that are used throughout the controller. Inside this method, I call the getAllRecords method from the Orders Details class, which returns the complete collection of order data. Now, I integrate the Syncfusion Data Grid into the React application. In the app.jsx file, I import the necessary modules such as Data Manager and URL Adapter. Then, I configure the Data Manager like this. The URL option specifies the API endpoint that the React Data Grid were used to communicate with server, where XXXX represents the port number of the ASP.NET Core application. I will modify the port number with the specific local host value after building the application. Next, I configured the data manager to use the URL adapter for handling server-side operations. The URL adapter enables the data manager to send requests for reading, inserting, updating, and deleting records in the server using standard HTTP call. Next, in the program.cs file, I'm adding Newtonsoft JSON serialization to control the JSON property naming in the API responses. Next, I'm adding CORS configuration to allow the API to be accessed from any front end, and also configuring Newtonsoft.json to format the responses. Then, I'm enabling the CORS policy in the request pipeline using app.useCORS. Now I run the application. When I run the application, the following terminals are created. You can see the port number has been generated. I update this port number in the data manager URL. See, the data source has been rendered on the server side. Now I will show you how to enable editing. First, I import the required modules from the EJ2 React Data Grid package. Then, I inject the edit and toolbar services. Then, I configure the edit settings to allow adding, allow editing, and allow deleting to true. I also add toolbar options such as add, edit, delete, update, cancel, and search to perform these actions. Finally, I assign this configuration to Grid's edit settings and toolbar properties. After this, I need to define the primary key column, since the editing functionality requires a unique identifier for each row. To do that, I set the asPrimaryKey property to true for the order ID column. To validate user input, I define a validation rule named order ID rules and use it to make the order ID field required. Then, I assign order ID rules to the validation rules property of the order ID column. In the output, you can see the edit settings and toolbar items are enabled. Next, I will add the CRUD options for the grid. In the grid controller CS file, first I add a generic CRUD model class to handle all CRUD operations from the grid in a structured format. I add the code configuration for inserting records. I add the configuration for updating records, and then the code for deleting records. In the app.jsx file, I add the URL configuration for insert, update, and delete with the generated port number. Let's see the output. Now, let's understand how the CRUD actions work. First, I add a new record. I click the Add button in the Grid toolbar. The grid opens a new editable row where I can enter the required field values. After entering the data, I click the Update button. Now you can see that the new record has been added successfully to the grid. If you look at the Network tab, the Data Manager has called the Insert endpoint with the newly added record details. Next, I edit an existing record. I select a row, click the Edit button, modify some values, and then click Update. The changes are immediately reflected in the grid. In the Network tab, you can see that the update request contains the updated record details. Now, I will delete a record. I select a record and click the Delete button in the toolbar. The record is removed from the grid. In the Network tab, you can see that the delete request is sent to the server. All these operations, paging, sorting, filtering, and CRUD, are automatically handled by the Data Manager, which sends structured HTTP post requests and processes the server response efficiently. Let me wrap up this video. I demonstrated how to configure a server-side data source, integrate the React Data Grid, enable editing and toolbar actions, and how to perform CRUD operations using the Data Manager with URL adapter for seamless client-server communication. If you want to try out the example used in this video, download it from the GitHub link in the description below. I have also shared a link to learn how to obtain a free license key to use our React components through our community license if you are eligible. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel.